Hello, everybody. So great to have you back on our show. And I have a special guest today that her and I met. And honestly, I think everybody needs their story told. We really just hit it off. And I knew that if we hit it off, that you, as my audience, are absolutely going to love her. So our special guest today is Dr. Jasmine Alec. She has just an amazing heart, an amazing smile, an amazing, really story to share with others because her background is she went to medical school and was studying internal medicine and just realized that maybe what we all thought our path would be turned out to not be the exact path that she sought out. And some of the times that's always a challenge. And the fact that she's here and deciding where's my life going to go from here is just fun and exciting because I think each and every one of us can reinvent ourselves at any time. So Dr. Alec, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Kelly, for that introduction.
Oh my gosh, it's a pleasure. And, having a conversation with people is one of the things that over time I feel has been kind of an art that's gotten left behind. And I love podcasting because it's the time that we can really have conversation.
Mhm.
And the women listening to us can feel like they're sitting right next to us, like enjoying a cup of tea, having this conversation, which it just, we're all a little bit more isolated or just doing our own thing. And so being able to take stories from anywhere around the world is just so, I think, reassuring and actually can leave a bigger imprint on somebody than we think. So again, thank you so much for being with us.
100%. And I feel like a lot of times when you are able to see these organic conversations, it really helps connect people, right? And it just like that's been the great thing about Instagram is that I feel so connected sometimes or feel so seen. And it may be somebody who's in a completely different country, completely different part of the world. Um, but you may not have access to those conversations in your immediate circle. So, social media, I know there's like so many negatives that people harp on, but it's definitely the one positive that I've seen.
Absolutely. Well, I think between social media, podcasting, we have so much information at our fingertips. But what I tell everybody is you're in charge of cultivating what you want to listen to and what you want to watch. So you can
Absolutely.
you can let social media or that part of your world turn bad and negative should you choose to let that into your life. But that's how we create the life that we want, right? By creating
Hmm.
these amazing relationships and boundaries and just putting the goodness in. So let's just start a little bit with your journey and your journey into medicine. And did you like always know from a little girl you wanted to be a doctor, or what kind of was your path in medicine?
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually came across this old like assignment from maybe when I was in grade one, and there was this like drawing that I had, and underneath it said what I want to be when I grow up, and it said a doctor, and there's like a picture of like this, woman with a stethoscope and a little kid. So I found that really interesting because actually through school, I would say through elementary, middle school, like all of that, that wasn't something I was interested in. I think I was really interested in the social sciences. I did a bunch of law courses, philosophy, and I think initially I thought maybe I would go into law. And ultimately, I ended up doing or going into health sci at the University of Western. And that was when I think it was halfway through undergrad where I had this moment in one of my classes where I realized I didn't want to do like management and I wanted to be on the front lines. And I think that was this key moment. So then that I think kind of changed my mind a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. And tell us, is there doctors in your family or other people in medicine in your family, or were you kind of like the first?
In my immediate family, I would say no, not really. I had one aunt and uncle that lived in the States. They were physicians. And, you know, again, there was some distance. So you would always kind of hear them like, as like, oh, wow, they're doctors. But there wasn't anyone in my immediate like home circle. You know what I mean? People
Mhm.
that were part of my immediate community, I guess.
Yes, and sometimes it's like, oh, my dad and my uncle and my cousin and like they're all doctors or lineage of they're a dentist, they're this, right? But sometimes when nobody was and you're the first, sometimes it's even a bigger deal.
It definitely is. And then later on, and maybe we'll talk about this, but later on, I realized that when you're in a situation like that, that's why it's important to have mentorship or people to, in a variety of mentors to kind of hear back from. Because when, especially when like there's certain careers that are really like put on pedestals.
Yes.
Um, and there's always, there's positives, but then there's also the negatives. And you don't have that insight, right? If you don't have those individuals around you where you don't realize what it's really going to be like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
My aunt who is a physician, that has been a conversation with her kids in terms of the realities. Like, you do not need to take this path. It is going to be this challenging, and these are the different challenges you're going to face. These are the sacrifices you're going to face. So you need to be sure that this is something that you want to, take on. And I think even having seen like my journey in terms of how many years, like the different sacrifices, things like that, I think that's actually had an impact on some of my cousins in terms of like making, their decision making, as well as they've, gone through like undergrad and then pick grad schools where they're like, there's other ways to like, I feel like people don't realize that there are so many better ways to make money. Like, making money is not why you would get into becoming a physician. It's, you know what I mean? And so
And
there's so many
serving
other ways to
people,
do that.
like making money for one, there's so many other ways. And serving people today is
Yeah,
there's hundreds of ways to serve people if that's what you
absolutely.
want to do.
Absolutely. And there's so many different routes in terms of, even if you want to make an impact, for example, you can get into health policy, right? So even if you're interested in health, right, there are different ways of going about it. And now even like with health tech and things like that, there's just so many creative ways to get involved without it necessarily being that specific, career.
Yes. And would you say, in historically looking back, maybe, I don't know, at least 20, 30 years ago, if not 50 years ago, that if somebody were to enter medicine then versus today, that because of the world we're living in and how fast and technology and expectations and just how insurance company and pharma play a bigger role, that the stressors of becoming a doctor are different than it was, say, 50 years ago?
Oh, I'm sure that it is. I'm sure that it is even compare in the last like decade or so, right?
Yes. Yes.
And those things also change depending on what the healthcare system looks like in the country that you practice in. So the stressors that are particular to, for example, Canada, and the Canadian healthcare system are going to be very different, in the U.S. healthcare system, right? So I have different like pros and cons about each, right? And but yeah, there, at least speaking from like the US standpoint, there's a lot of medical legal aspects in terms of practicing medicine, that you have to think about. Obviously, pharmaceutical involvement, things like that. Like, there's so much to consider.
There is so much to consider. So tell us, kind of as we're looking at your path into medicine, what was the number one thing that excited you that you were like, oh yeah, no, 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 I want to become a doctor? Because going to medical school is one thing, but really this idea of I want to become a doctor, like what was your big passion for wanting to pursue that?
I think being at the bedside, being like front facing with an individual where you're going to guide them through, whatever health journey it is. And I think at that point, more specifically, it was from in the context of disease and treatment, right?
Mhm.
And when I look back at that and kind of now redefine that a little bit, it's really like walking someone through their health journey, being able to see their health improve. And, now I'm kind of realizing that there's so many different ways of doing that where it's not necessarily like, here's a medication that will help you. And sometimes the other ways can be even more gratifying.
Oh, for sure. So tell us about in your journey, as you were in residency. What was the pivot for you that you really realized this isn't serving me anymore and I'm struggling and I'm going to make this decision to make a pivot?
Yeah. I mean, I guess like without getting into tons of details about it, but it was definitely more of a jarring experience where I think I
Maybe share a little
there
bit. Like
was
what was that experience? What did your days look like?
oh man, like I and you have to like understand that this is my personal experience, right? This
Yes,
isn't everyone's
100%.
experience. But I definitely remember in my intern year, at least for the first few months, um, I was just so filled with imposter syndrome, so filled with fear, filled with, like double checking, triple checking my notes to make sure everything was okay. Every Friday, by the end of the week, like you haven't slept that much. So by the end of the week, you're kind of a mess. And I remember being on the phone with my mom and just like finding a quiet corner of the hospital and crying, like, oh my God, like I'm so tired. And then you would just do it again, right?
Yeah.
And eventually you would just I can't even like going back to that space. There were so many different coping mechanisms, right? Where you didn't have time a lot of the times to like process anything. Like you were just going from situation to situation. And effectively it was like you were kind of going through like mild trauma, and you don't really have time to really like process anything. You just turn right and on to the next person, on to the next thing. So I think a lot of it was just kind of this underlying like just building up, right,
Mhm.
of different kinds of emotional stressors, psychological stressors. um I and definitely looking back at it, there's so many different things where I think feeling like I had a lack of support, and sometimes it's not even are there resources, there may be resources available, but sometimes there's a disconnect where as an individual, if you feel like no one understands or no one, no one supports me, or and I think that's where my mindset was at, is that I felt very alone. And then also like, I think at that point I had been away from my community, like my family, my friends, for almost a decade at this point, right? And I would advise, like, honestly, to anyone is like to make sure that you really stay anchored in some of those key relationships. Um, they're so fulfilling, and not just in terms of like a relation from a relationship standpoint, but just in terms of your emotional and almost like your spiritual health as well, to keep you like grounded. But yeah, and then obviously like my physical health, it was everything all at once, really, like the
Mhm.
perfect storm, I think. Where I had, from I think midway through, before I started residency, I had done research for about a year and a half, and midway through that, it just my laser focus was to be the best that I could be. So I just did focused on being at the hospital all the time, doing all the work, putting in the hours, just grinding, grinding, grinding. And my physical health took a toll. It took a complete back seat. I didn't work out. I didn't exercise. Nutrition was whatever was in front of me, really. That's what I ate. Like I remember stuffing my pockets with crackers from the nurse's station. Um, just insane. And that also, took a toll on me. I would throw my back out almost every 6 weeks in residency, and it was the like horrible, debilitating like pain. Just like on my hands and knees, crying, and that was just from the sheer weight. My body, like I had just put on too much weight all at once, and I was like in my mid to late 20s,
Yeah.
and walking around looking like this crippled old woman, in the hospital. It was just insane. And so, like I show people pictures of what I looked like back in the like, during that time period, and they're like, "You look so much younger now."
Oh,
you
I'm
know, there.
sure, right? This youthfulness of when you're like, I'm reclaiming myself. And you guys, I want to just pause for a second because, we're not just talking about somebody that has a journey of going to medical school. And we're not talking about somebody that's just in a position of a difficult and high prestigious job. Like maybe it's an attorney, maybe it's a pharmacist. You could be anywhere in your life. You could be a mom that just had newborns, that you're overwhelmed, not taking care of yourself, not eating, don't have a support system. And you're like, am I alone? This is awful. And I think it's when you're in the place of I'm alone, I've worked so hard, this is what I wanted. I worked so hard to have babies, this is what I wanted. I worked so hard to be a doctor, this is what I wanted. And now I feel alone and now I'm unhappy. I guess I'll either have to suffer and do it because this is the thing. Or is it okay? Can I ask for help? Can I pivot? Can I do something different? We want to be here to empower you that wherever you are in your journey, because when we don't and we feel stuck and alone, I think that's when things really start to unfold of mental health disorders, addictions. We reach for other things, not really realizing or thinking, oh, this will help it or this will numb it, but we kind of don't know there's another way. So it's just, let me just get through. And maybe, you can share a little bit more about your story because it's sometimes we don't think there's a better way.
Yeah. And there's a term for that. I think a lot of us, hear about this as burnout, right? And
Yes.
that overwhelm really is the burnout, right? Where you have mentally exhausted yourself, emotionally. If you're spiritual, then spiritually exhausted yourself, and then physically. So all elements have now been, kind of spent, used up, and usually you're using some sort of band-aid solution, right, to kind of help cope. Eventually the coping doesn't help, so then it turns into an escape mechanism, right? Well, if my life is going to suck so much, then at least for this hour or a few hours, I don't need to think about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's exactly where individuals, and this was true for me, right, where you may reach for a substance, or something else, and whether for me, like, it may have been alcohol, food. I don't know how many times I like ate, literally like ordered. It was almost like I felt like punishing myself, where I would just sit and eat a whole pizza, ice cream, and I would just tell myself, like, this is the only way for me to feel happy right now, you know.
Who else is
And
depressed? Are you listening? Have you ever been that way? And then afterward, you're like, what is going on? But in the moment, we
and
think this is the best answer for us. And then when you're talking about burnout, it's like, wow, I'm in burnout. And now I'm not even doing anything to nourish me. Now I even feel worse because I'm not giving my body what it needs in many ways. And there's so many people in the world that I think either feel that way now or were that way then and really need to know that there's hope.
absolutely. And the interesting thing is, it's not just like that toxic relationship with escape, that can come in so many different forms, right? So for anyone who's listening, it maybe you relate to abusing like food, right? Where you're using it to escape. Maybe it's a substance, maybe, like alcohol or a drug. But it can also be people, right? It can also be things, right? That we use to fill this like void, right?
Mhm.
Where we don't feel fulfilled, we don't feel sustained. So now I'm going to use something or use someone to make me feel better, right?
Yes.
um, and and that was exactly kind of where my mental state was at the time. And um, I don't think a person like that can be of good service anyway, to
Mhm.
be entirely honest. And so even, like when I came back, like I felt like I was like entirely like, and by back I mean like back to Canada. um I was in shock, I think, for several months, where I had been, ripped out of all I had known
Mhm.
for, X amount of years. And that was my identity. That
Yes.
was what I just spent like my entire like 20s doing, right? That's all I knew. And then there was so much just guilt and shame around, am I wasting away this very niche knowledge that I just spent all this time, energy, money, acquiring? And am I being selfish by not going back, by not, sharing this knowledge, right? The whole purpose of acquiring it was that I could help people.
Yes.
So that was something I had to work through. And I think it took me at least about a year of just like implementing different and it was honestly like a concerted effort between mental health and movement where I had to do both. Um, and finally, like I saw it's like you got to take the actions first, and then the feelings, the thoughts, everything else follows. Lags a little, but it eventually follows.
Oh, I love that. I think that's the biggest component that people don't do is take action. They're waiting to feel better before they take
Yeah,
action. And the
yeah,
action can be one small step, right? Like one small step. It's deciding to go to the grocery store to maybe buy some healthier foods. It's deciding to make a phone call to reach out to somebody that might be of help. It's just
yep,
one small step. Sometimes I think we think we're in the hole too deep or too big, and most people don't know where to start.
yeah. And I for and I think this time around for me, because I've gone through something similar in my early 20s as well, where I had to get myself out of like a really deep mental like rut. And at that point, I had used exercise as like this like initial jumping off point. So I think, and then the fact that I gained so much weight when I came back to Canada, I think that was that first kind of thing. Maybe it was a little bit of vanity, right? That thought is like I need to lose some weight, but I find that anytime I've made any change or anytime I've felt physically stuck, the first thing that I've done, and I've done this even like when I'm studying, right? You feel stuck, you need a change of space, right? And that's all it is like that initial movement. And for days where, initially where I felt like I was being completely unproductive, not contributing, um, even if I had that single win, right, where I went for a walk, I did some sort of physical movement. It was, at least that one thing I could tick off and say, I did something,
Yes.
I moved.
And so many leaders in personal development in medicine, they're really talking about if you change your physiology, you start changing everything. And so for all of you out there listening, like, what do you mean? It's just get up and move your body, right? Change the
Yeah.
physiology of where you're at for the moment. Maybe you're going to go for a walk. Maybe you're going to do a couple yoga stretches. Maybe you just go do some, I don't know, like squats or push-ups or something, but change your physiology and go, oh, okay, like now I can help myself get unstuck. But action really will precede how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so, no matter where you are, one, note that you don't always have to finish wherever you're at. You can pivot at any time, which I love. You may feel like it's the mountain. How can I? I mean, I remember as a physical therapist in my journey, I started becoming the director of departments, and they were grooming me to be the CEO of the hospital. And I realized I had two tiny children. I was already on call. Would go get them, come back, be doing paperwork or taking calls late into the night. And they wanted to groom me to be the CEO. And I'm like, wait, is this what I want? Because I'll even be busier. Like, and I had to really ask myself, this was the trajectory they wanted me to go on. This is the trajectory they thought I would be good in this role. But did I want that? And sometimes we
Mm-hmm.
just get caught in the ladder or other people's expectations and not really like, well, what do I want?
100%.
And I'll say
100%.
my second pivot is when I was moving across the country and my husband and I decided not to open up a physical therapy clinic again. I knew for 2 years prior, but I couldn't really get myself to say it because I'd wrapped my identity up in being this expert in stroke and brain injury. And this identity thing was, it was mind blowing how much it had a hold on me in moving forward.
100%. And I think that applies to so many different, not just careers, but even like literally any type of identity that you might have, right? If that identity um, grips you in such a way that you are not able to even take in there's a certain point where it becomes almost like a self-limiting belief,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. But yeah, it I I think that was a really hard one to get past, and there was a lot of work in terms of even like ego and kind of like developing some humility, things like that, and open-mindedness. All of those things kind of went hand in hand um, in order to pivot in a more and even in my pivots, I find that there's been layers,
Mhm.
as you go through, the work that you do, that you may have an epiphany and then you have another one and then another layer,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. And I think let me ask you this question. Once you decided that you were going to change and you were leaving medicine as you knew it, the role that you knew it, because now you're really still serving others and practicing, right? Absolutely, as this preventative health entrepreneur and this health and wellness like coaching and helping others. But what is this time period? Because I think people, we want instant gratification and nothing, even though you may have gone like, I'm out, I'm going to do something different. Your recovering of who you became and helping you get healthy again wasn't an overnight flip the switch.
No, and it was, there was like phases, right? And I think, yeah, the other thing is that many times it's not such a empowering decision, like, where I'm out of here, like,
Yeah.
I suddenly feel empowered. It was not that way at all, right? Where um i I felt like forced, where there wasn't, another option. And even later through like the different phases where, I got a job in health tech, it wasn't like I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I was like, well, I've got the research background. I don't mind numbers. This seems to be like a cool intersection. I just need a job. Right.
Mhm.
And then I got in like, so at that point, there's going to be parts of your journey where sometimes it's just more important to take the forward motion and just to take the steps, even if you don't know necessarily like where you're going to end up.
Mhm.
And I think there were definitely moments where that's what I was doing. I was just putting one step in front of the other. Well, and I didn't really know where it was going. And for health tech, I actually really enjoyed being in health tech for, the time period that I was in it. But that was about a 4-year time period, right? And in the latter 2 years, that's when I think I started to again like have this inner urge where I was like, I want to share some value, with people. I want to figure out like, do I write a podcast? Da 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 da. Do I write a blog? How am I going to go about this? So it was something I started thinking about. I actually started writing, and that must have been 2 or 3 years ago where I started thinking about it. So it's like it's been a journey. You know what I mean?
Yes.
um and I never like I didn't jump on something immediately, right? But every step that I took, so initially everything felt very forced, and then it was like almost like begrudgingly, and then, I started to think about things. I was cautious, I was weary, and now it has positioned me to be in a place where today I'm so much more receptive, I'm so much more open, I'm a lot quicker at just being like, yes, let's do this. And that trust and faith has taken time to kind of develop over time. And I know some people are so much better at that, but the reason why I'm sharing this is that I think it's really easy for people to look at someone and be like, oh, she must do that all the time. Or, you know, it's not like I had to develop even that faith and that courage that, in terms of making certain scary decisions or doing things that are new. now I'm so much more like, it's so much easier for me to be like, you know what, health coaching, bring it on.
Yes, yes. And we had like a little pre-discussion before this, you guys.
Yeah.
And in that chat, it was how beautiful it is that we can change tomorrow, change what we want to do, go experience something new. We have information at our fingertips. So it's not like we have a lack of resources. We just need to be resourceful. And sometimes we put it on ourselves that like, oh, but everybody will ask and everybody will wonder. No, we're the ones putting all that pressure. Everybody else is so entrenched with their own lives. They're not like, wait, you just changed your title. Wait, you were just, in health tech and now you're this entrepreneur in wellness. Like what? No one really cares. We think they all care. But the real thing is keep pursuing till you find what you love. And there is an
Mm-hmm.
intersection of, yes, if you're turning this into like a job employment and you need to make money, there is like, what are you good at that you could make money at? I don't think we should suffer in our jobs. That's for sure.
No.
Sometimes there is a skill set that could make you a lot of money. And maybe if that's the case, but you don't love it, could you do that part-time and find other things that you do to fill yourself up and fuel your body? Because we weren't put here to suffer. We weren't put here for hardship. We were put here to do great things. And so if you're currently in a position that you don't feel like, gosh, Kellie, I hear what you're saying, but I do not feel like I'm doing great things. I can't even like, keep my house tidy or get my kids fed or whatever that may be. Just take one step. And I think it goes back to the action. But I also want you guys to really hear that anybody at any stage of life, and I think if you look at the statistics today, that most of us have experienced some form of mental illness or mental health just concern. I won't even say like
Mm-hmm.
illness per se. And that knowing most of the time, if you take care of your body, that will help you in taking actions of moving your body and better sleep and better nutrition to make better decisions. But the big thing is you're not alone and you can get better. It doesn't mean that just because you have depression today, you'll always have depression. If you're overweight because you've had some poor choices or done things, that doesn't mean you're going to be overweight forever. You have the
Mm-hmm.
power within you. And it really is just the faith and believing. And even if what you pivot to tomorrow isn't your ultimate, that is the path or the road that will lead you, I truly believe, to something great. I mean, I think your journey's been amazing and you've made a lot of little pivots here. I mean, some big, big pivots and some small pivots in finding your way.
Absolutely. And even in terms of, there was actually a point that you made um, earlier where you're talking about movement and the physiological impact that it has. So it's not just about, there's obviously like psychologically you're going to feel better, right, by all these changes we're talking about, but physiologically as well, right? But it is studied science, right? Like in terms of even things like gratitude practice, right? Meditation, different kinds of breathing techniques, right? These are all things that actually have science behind them. So anything that you do over time, right, it's actually going to change you at a physiological level, right? So like, for example, I suffered from anxiety, I had depression, I dealt with some addiction stuff, and all of these things, ADHD as well, right? And all of these things have a physiological impact on you, right? And so when we're talking about some of these changes in terms of behavioral practices, things that you do for your mental health, things that you do for your physical health, nutrition, right? When you start to change these things, you're going to change your physiology. You are eventually going to change how you feel.
Uh, it is so much the truth. And I think especially for women that we are living in a time, a day and age that we can do it all. And we have so many choices of unlimited, like, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? It's like so many choices. But at the same time, it's like, oh, I'm also supposed to be this CEO or be this doctor and take care of my family and do this and do that. And we forget those practices that you just talked about, because mental health is for all of us. It's for every single one of us. It's not if you have a mental health issue, it's to let you live without having a big mental health issue, of using these strategies.
100%.
So please, ladies, hear what Dr. Jasmine is saying, and don't wait till you feel like you're in a crisis. Use these things, because just breath work can change your physiology. Just stop and take a couple of breaths. There's all sorts of breathing techniques, but even if you just take 60 seconds before you walk into that room to greet your spouse, before you walk into that meeting, right? Change your physiology with some breath work, or moving your body, and you'll just be amazed at how much more clear you feel and how positive you feel, and how much that next interaction is going to be what you're looking for, versus just racing to the next thing and then having the reaction be like anything other than maybe the most pleasant one.
I 100% agree. And the other thing is that when you don't have yourself, I think sometimes we oversimplify our definitions of, you know, what's good mental health, what's bad mental health. And it's like very black and white. Well, if I don't have the mental health condition that's diagnosed, that means there's nothing else, like nothing I need to do for it.
Oh,
right.
yes. Yes. I love this.
Or if I don't have a chronic condition that's diagnosed, that means I'm good. Right. Like, if my blood work is, you know, it's normal, so then I don't need to do anything, like nothing is wrong. Right. And I find this to be true, like on all of those levels, where, you know, even on a spiritual basis, is that we are actually more on a gradient, right? And we have stuck these like defining points at different parts of it, where tip you into this diagnosis or not in this diagnosis or whatever it is, to you know, provide ourselves with a definition. But really, we're on a spectrum. So no matter where you are on that spectrum, there's always room for movement. And you kind of have to ask yourself, like, what practices am I engaging in that are moving the needle in the direction that I want to be going in? And even if it's like, and I'm not saying this because I don't, it shouldn't be overwhelming, right? Everything, like whatever practices that you use, they should be simple, they should work for you, and they can be really, really small, right? They can start very, very small. But I think the point is that it makes your priority list, right? That you're able to practice or implement it in a way that is consistent, so that it's in your forefront, right? I had this one mentor, and one thing that he said always stuck with me is that your priority list, the order that it's in, will change from a week to week basis, and sometimes even a month to month basis, right? But the important thing is that you keep all those things on that list, right? So even if, let's say, and you don't have to beat yourself up, it's just that's how life is.
Correct.
Right. So and the same thing works with all of these like components, you know, whether it's like mental health or emotional health, versus, you know, physical health, is that there's always something that you can do that is kind of moving the needle a little bit, right? And you don't have to be like 100%. Like, I think, and we talked about this actually right before we started, is that there's so many people on social media where we see them at this latter part of their journey, where they've already done all these crazy things, put in years of time, right? And then you're comparing yourself to what they do on a daily basis, not realizing that, you know, even in terms of my own, you know, kind of like fitness journey, right? It took 4 to 5 years of getting where I am now in terms of my physical fitness. Diet and nutrition came in to play, I would say, 2 years ago. And a lot of the nuanced stuff that I've been kind of doing came in to play in this last year, right? And I'm still like adding and tweaking and learning, right? So it's more of a commitment to that this is important to me. I'm going to keep learning. I'm going to keep adding, right? But, you know, the compounding over time definitely, you know, will have an impact. You just, it can't be this finite, like, I'm good or not. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Is
yes.
that, yeah.
And I think if we look at, wellness as this journey that I think everybody want to agree. They want to live well, they don't want to live sick. So if we want to live well, what are those small daily habits for that compounding effect? Just like we use money in compounding and look at
Hmm.
the end result in 30 years, right? So we do these small micro habits today. But what you're doing today doesn't have to be the same. Other parts of your life may change and ebb and flow. And so you do more of this and less of this, but you always have your wellness program.
Hmm.
For women starting out, I kind of say, do something easy in the morning, because if you win your morning, you're more apt to win the day. If you don't do anything in the morning and you get frustrated and then the end of the day, then we're tired, then we really don't think about our wellness practices, right? So if you can do like drink your water, do 5 minutes of movement and 5 minutes of nourishing your mind, whether that's journaling, reading the Bible, meditating, whatever your thing is start your day with a little success, and then you're going to optimize your best chance of having the best day. But
Hmm.
what that routine looks like for you in a month, in a year, could be drastically different. But you got to just pick something.
Yeah. 100%. And really, like, it's just like starting kind of like where you are, right? Is,
Yes, yes. And
yeah.
I think ultimately we talked about, if I could say what would be your one big takeaway for all of the audience, right? Like, and it's you guys, it's really hard to wrap up when you have a journey that has been ebbing and flowing with a lot of changes and turns, and you're still in it. We're all in our own
Yeah.
journey. That gosh, if I would pick one thing, but you were gonna go there. So I want you to
Yeah.
like hone in on that for everybody.
Yeah. I only said that because I find myself saying that to a lot of people. It is start where you are, right? And this also goes back to kind of what we were just talking about, is not comparison, comparing ourselves to individuals that are just further along in their journey, and that's all it is.
Mhm.
I think recently, like, I've had individuals like where they'll make a comment about how, like, my physique has improved or changed, and you know and oh, I wish like I was like that. And I'm like, well, like, you can if you want to, but right, it took so much time to get here, and where I started, right, was very like humble places, right, where movement for me at you know like 4 years ago meant body weight exercises. It meant feeling completely spent at the end of like a 30-minute session. Yoga, I did at home stuff, going for walks, 1K runs. Those were a win at the time, right? So that's where I was, right? And it was more than what I did the day before. It was more than what I was doing initially. And that's really all it means, is that, when it comes to when you look at the different buckets that are going to make your priority list, right? What can I, alter, tweak, change right now? That's something that's doable, that's practical, that works, that I can commit to doing. And let's just start there, right? I don't need to be, there's so much information out there again, right? It's like, do I need to be like keto? Do I need to be vegan? Do I need to be like totally plant-based? Does everything need to be organic? There's so many things, and I'm not knocking on them in the sense that a lot of those things could be absolutely great and phenomenal for you, but you don't need to make this 180 change to your life,
Yeah.
like where, like, you don't need to throw out everything right now, right? Let's just start somewhere small, right? And really, I think where you will end up really winning is once those buckets end up making that priority list permanently, right?
Yeah.
And there was a point where I remember, this is like a few years ago, where it might have been like 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, but I remember I stopped care, and it was like I had that momentary, like, the realization that I'm like, I no longer am afraid of skipping a workout, because initially when I started working out, I was afraid that if I missed one, I might just not do another one because
Yes.
I might just fall off, right? Um, and I wasn't worried, because I'm like, I know I will. Like I'm confident, right? Like this is now a part of the way I live, right? So then and that's kind of like what it was that like what's important, I guess, and what I'm trying to say here is that once those things become ingrained in who you are, then you know it's gonna you're gonna do it, you know you'll learn more about it, it'll you just end up trusting that it's gonna happen.
Yes. And you let go of the overwhelm, right? That little thing that's
Yes,
holding on to you of you saying like, oh God, I can't miss because what if it just became, oh, I can totally miss because I exercise all the time. Like this is just me. I'm a healthy person. And
this
that
is who I am.
that didn't take up that mental energy anymore because it just is.
100%.
So you guys, that I absolutely love that in your journey. Just start with where you are. Be very, very gentle and kind to yourself and get rid of that comparison because everybody behind the scenes has their own journey. So for you, just own you and take that first step. So where can everybody find you? This was amazing today. I really hope you guys, wherever
Absolutely.
you are in life, like we're like, oh my God, this was mind blowing because I needed to pivot. I needed a takeaway. I needed to get rid of an old habit. I needed to get back to my wellness routines. I mean, there was a lot of really juicy nuggets in there, you guys. So I want you to continue to be able to follow Dr. Jasmine. So where can they find you?
Uh, they can find me on Instagram. It's Jasmine, JasmineEka.MD
Perfect.
on Instagram. Yeah. And I just wanted to say thank you so much again for having me. And um, there have been moments where, like, and we started off the podcast with this, was that feeling alone. And I'm hoping that's what comes from this, is that there's something in the conversation where, you can feel at least that, in whatever struggle you're having, whatever part of your journey you're in, that you aren't alone. It's totally normal to doubt yourself, to have fear, to have a mental breakdown, whatever it is, and to start over again, right? We people do this all the time, and I think it's important for the people who are doing those things to kind of, I know it's not like the prettiest thing to talk about all the time, but I think it's important for that reason to share, because you never know who's listening and who needs to kind of hear that. And yeah, if anyone wants to know more, just, message me like a private DM and we can talk more too.
Uh, Such a gift, such a pleasure. We appreciate you being with all of us today. And I hope you guys reach out to her. And for most of you guys on the show, we will see you again in the next episode. Have a fantastic day.